Welcome to the Soul Surgery Podcast. My name is Nikki Clinch and I am your host. I am a maturation facilitator, teacher and coach, integrative holistic health counselor, breathwork facilitator, and author. I am the founder of the Academy of Maturation Coaching, The Alchemy of Being, where I train as many people as I can to become powerful spaces for human beings to come home to their authentic truth. Maturation is a powerful evolutionary process of dissolving trauma, breaking free of stuck patterns, and growing and healing at the taproot. Growing out of who we thought we were from the stories led by our past conditioning in order to grow and evolve into who we were born to be. In this podcast, I will be sharing many different things with you, opening up the doorways to my coaching sessions where you can witness with your own eyes how trauma contaminates our reality and how we can dissolve it, heal it at the root, and rewrite the story of our lives, reclaiming our power and reminding each one of us that who we are is wholeness. I will be interviewing some of the world's most prominent teachers in spirituality, healing, transformation, and human evolvement, and sharing with you my own teachings and learnings along the way. And above all, sharing with you my heart. The purpose of this podcast is to remind each one of you who you really are, to open up the doorway to a new possibility, to a new paradigm, to healing, health, transformation, and our evolvement as individuals and a species. So I hope you enjoy today's episode. One thing that you can do for me, if you find this podcast useful and if you love it, please do subscribe. And if you feel called to, leave a review, because reviews really matter. They help to spread the word and help to spread this podcast to as many people as we can. And lastly, if you have any big aha moments, any shifts, any insights in any of these episodes, please do share it with me. Share with me which episode it was, where in the episode it happened, and how it has impacted you and your life. Because there is nothing more I love than hearing from you and hearing your healing. So without further ado, let's get going. I hope you enjoy today's episode on the Soul Surgery Podcast. Hey, Nathaniel, how are you? Thank you for coming on the Soul Surgery Podcast. How are you today?
Thanks for having me. I'm so great. We back and forth quite a bit to finally get here, and I'm glad it's happening. I'm excited.
Yeah, I always find it interesting in the particular interviews where there's this kind of back and forthness that happens, whether it's tech issues or whether it's schedule issues. And I always get a sense that actually those are the ones where I know that the conversation is really going to be quite important and needed. And I don't know you, but yet I have this sense that I wanted to sit with you and have a conversation with you. I just could tell that where you were speaking from, and what I mean by that is the space in which you speak from, I wanted to sit and dive into dialogue with you. So thank you for saying yes to my invitation.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for living that way. You know, that's such a, I would actually say that a big portion of my life over the last 10 years has been the result of that exact same kind of nudge. Like, ooh, I like how this person feels, or how it feels when they're clearly like excited about something or passionate about something, and then just having the courage to just be like, yo, just to reach out like, yo, you feel really awesome, and I don't even know why. Let's find out what that's about, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's just to touch on that first, I think that's actually a really potent and important thing to bring to the light here, is listening to where someone is speaking from rather than just what they're saying. You know, the quality or the consciousness or the space in which the communication is coming from, rather than just the content. And I think, you know, most of us, you know, in humanity, we focus so much on what is being said and what is being done, and without the real listening of where someone is coming from. And that's something that I find very interesting. I like to listen deeper than just the content.
Because it's always so obvious as well when, and kind of awkward when someone might have a lot of content and you almost can't even tell where it's coming from, or you can tell that it's coming from like, oh, they're just doing what they think they need to be doing, or how you're supposed to communicate or share or do something from that space. And that really stands out. Right. So I think it's a good practice for us
Yes.
also pay attention. Like, so what's the other option? How does that feel? How do we practice that?
Absolutely. So before we dive any further, set the scene for me. Where are you, and like where are you living, and tell me where you are right now in your life.
Ah, well, I'm right here, which is awesome, and I love it here. I just made a post the other day that said, the whole phrase like "follow your heart," and it's like, well, where's your heart? Your heart's right here. You don't have to go anywhere, right? So I've just been in that practice a lot lately, and just really appreciating that. I've lived in Austin, Texas for the last year now, which has been lovely. I grew up in California, and I'm in a season of life that is just so expansive and so purposeful, which is interesting to say because I've been running my own online business, coaching, making courses and content and retreats, doing all this stuff for over a decade now. So I've been very purposeful for a long time. And,
Yes.
just with all the crazy events of the last year and a half, which have been really, really challenging for a lot of people, it's also been a huge catalyst for a lot of people. And I chose to take the catalyst route. And I feel like I'm in this sort of season right now where not only do I finally understand the blueprints of like what has been wanting to come through and what's wanting to get built, but a lot of it is actually built, and a lot of it is like budding or maybe having like its first fruiting season, and if that metaphor makes sense. And totally in love with my partner. We just had our 2-year anniversary. Well, it was a while ago actually. Gosh, time flies. It's almost 2.5 years now, really.
Nice.
And yeah, and just being a curious observer. I feel like a big part of my role is just paying attention and kind of aggregating and distilling things and creating a refined way for us to deal with and handle everything that life's throwing at us right now. So I also feel like every day, especially over the last few months, has been me kind of sitting at this dashboard, so to speak, in this spaceship that's moving through, the current movement of all this stuff. I don't even know what words to put onto it, right? It's such a crazy making sort of setup, but I feel really grateful to have, there's something so stable in me, and I'm not trying to show off, but just something I've realized, just something that stayed so stable in me that allows me to deal with a lot of moving pieces. And I'm excited for the fruit that's going to be turning into soon as well, which is ideally being able to provide some more solace, no pun intended, with everything that's going on. And so I'm loving it, feeling very, very in my power, very connected to everything in ways that I haven't maybe in my life at all up until this point. And thanks for the question. It's a good space to just kind of like get back into that. I don't know if I said anything too coherent, but just enjoying where I'm at, feeling very on fire with it, and also feeling that like everything's just getting started all at the same time too, which is a fun feeling.
Well, you said a lot of things that are coherent, and I would like to touch on a few of them. But the first thing you said is, you've been purposeful for so long, but really in the last year, with everything going on in the world and on our planet, it just absolutely took a whole nother level of purpose. And I really identify with that. I think so many of us identify with that who've been mission-led, soul and mission-led in our work, that with the absolute sort of destruction and dismantling of the way that we've known our world and the matrix that we've been in, there's been this absolute invitation to step up and and serve. And when I mean serve, I mean serve something greater, something bigger, something else that is unknown. So I really hear that. And, it's quite a commitment, isn't it? Because there is so much madness and there is so much challenge. And it's really in these moments, and you may identify with this, that all the work that I've done on myself, and I can hear that you've done a lot too, that we really, really, this is where it really gets tested. It's like, how much can we really find the stillness at the center of the cyclone? How much can we really stay centered when everything is going into chaos? That it makes me think of every single plant medicine ceremony I've ever done, or it makes me think of every sort of dark night of the soul I've ever been through. It's like, how much can you stay in a space of listening, groundedness, presence, when everything is just going so that we don't get caught up in the noise and can be available for something else. And that's what I hear when you're speaking and you describe where you are. And I really identify with that. I heard recently, there's so much going on, and it is such a huge collective experience that it's no longer sufficient for each of us to be working individually and on our own. Now it's about a time to connect the points of light in the world, like a network. And that each of us steps up and comes out of hiding and really takes the invitation and does our work, and somehow we do it together. And when I hear you speak, it validates that feeling that I've been getting, and it's comforting to hear.
Good.
Yeah, and there's one other thing I wanted to point out that you spoke about the what was it that you said? It was like the opening of the seed or something.
Like the first fruit, the blossoming.
That's it. And my work is called maturation, which is really a process of growing. It's a process of nature and unfurling. And
I love that you chose that word, by the way.
Yes.
That takes courage, because that's what everyone's wishes they could just speak to directly, but we got to sometimes call it, a bunch of cool spiritual sounding whatevers, when it's like, no, you're just maturing, like you're actually, yes. So I just love, you're literally the only person I've seen use that word for your work. So just thank you. I bet it triggers people in a way they don't quite even notice or do notice. And I think that's just super, super awesome that you own that.
Thank you. It took balls at the beginning. It took balls at the beginning because literally nobody knew what it meant. And I'd be interviewed by the press, and particularly when the book was coming out, and people would literally ask me, can I change your title because no one will know what this means? And I would say, no, let's educate them. Mm-hmm. Let's use it and then educate. Because really if you're human, then this relates to you. We're all in a process of growing. We're either stuck or we're growing. But it is nature, it's human nature that we will eventually find a way to grow, whether it happens now or whether it happens in another lifetime.
Stuck is a method of growth, right? Every time Absolutely. I've ever been stuck, it was literally me growing once I realized that it was, once I was in a mature enough place to receive that wisdom from it. So I love the mature part is interesting because it becomes this like the baseline, right? If you're at a certain level of maturity, you're going to be getting these different kind of or more accurate perceptions and interpretations of what you're trying to process and move through in your life, instead of ultimately taking an immature filter to let everything, sift through first.
Yes. And what most of the people that I work with, what they find so hard to to accept at the beginning is that part of that maturing process is actually to be in the wrestling match with your own self, is actually to be in that struggle, the resistance, the stuckness, that actually by being in the experience of that, it changes us. It has an invitation in that. And, we look at that individually in our own lives, but you can see it collectively as well, the fight and the resistance and the chaos, that actually that is, like you said, that is a part, it's a fundamental part of the process, that we can't outgrow something until we have experienced it, fully experienced it. Otherwise, we're just in another form of resistance. We're just trying to replace it or fix it or avoid it somehow. That, the growing part is by experiencing all the wrestling and the struggling and the stuckness of the human condition. Yeah. So we're on the same page with that one. So I wanted to ask you, this is called the Surrender Series. And the reason why I came up with this concept was I just wanted to hear human stories, different human stories, and people who had roles of leadership about points of surrender in their life. And I just find it so fascinating and inspiring to hear the process in which someone goes through in those points of surrender, and hearing also the similarities when I've sat with enough people, that there is a kind of a continuous connection in how maturation occurs inside each person. So the first thing I want to ask you is, what does surrender mean to you when I say that word to you?
A lot. It means a lot. It's a very special word to me. And I love trying to have a very different answer. I do a lot of podcasts and interviews and stuff, and sometimes they just come really naturally. So this might seem a little weird at first, but surrender is the default from one perspective. Like, nothing's guaranteed. Life is inherently uncertain. Yep. Right? It seems like the sun's going to keep doing what the sun does, but I don't even know how that works in the first place. That's an automatic. I'm automatically surrendered to that. I don't know how to grow my own hair. I don't know how to digest my own food. I don't know how to heal my own cuts. Something has got that absolutely handled, and I'm in absolute surrender to that. So to me, surrender is almost like a verb for God, in a sense. Like, it's a way to genuinely be the mechanism of that type of force, that type of energy, because it's the default, right? You look at things in nature. You look at a forest, and like, oh, this tree's growing too big over here, and it's got to fall over, and everything it falls over on, just like, there's the default is just to surrender to that experience. There's zero resistance there. Sure, some animals will scurry away or whatever. That's great. That's their path. And they're also not running away with a story about the tree and why it shouldn't have done that and any of that kind of stuff. They're just on to the next thing. So I think surrender is where it's at, to put it simply.
That is my favorite answer to that question that I've heard yet, because it is absolutely the closest thing to what I also feel is surrender. And, really why I wrote the book and called it What I Did is, out of all of the animals in the animal kingdom, we're the only animal that has this self-reflecting mind. A cat isn't worried about being late today, or, the tree or the bird isn't worried about, putting on weight. What is it that stops us or blocks us from being able to really be present with the unknowing and the magic and the absolute curiosity of the fact that our skin can heal itself, and the fact that our hair will just grow, and that really in every single present moment, we really don't know what will be unfolding next. The thing that blocks us from that magic of that is the mind, is the stories. And like you said, that if the tree falls in the forest, it's not worried about what it's going to land on. It will just fall.
Yeah.
It's in the present. It's being.
We create our own need for surrender. Like we're the instigator of that whole issue.
We resist it.
Yeah.
The nature of the human condition and the nature of how the stories in the mind works is that we live in a state of resistance of the fact that actually surrender, the aliveness of surrender is always already there, but we miss it. Mm-hmm. We miss it because we're so stuck in this thinking process within our own selves. So thank you for presencing that, because that was a beautiful way to answer that question. I really appreciate that. So absolutely. When I ask you that, then what would be the biggest point of surrender in your life that comes to mind when I present that to you?
There's a lot. Having a biggest is very interesting. The biggest, I was assuming you were going to ask me this question. So I've been thinking about it a little bit. And what first came to mind was the first moment of it that I can remember, which was pretty significant, which was once I was able to comprehend that I was adopted. Because with that came a lot of other interesting thoughts like, okay, so where's my actual family? Why did they give me away? How does all this work? I was raised in a house with an older brother and an older sister who were also adopted. And I was the youngest. And it was very traumatic for me. I was the automatic kind of black sheep, which happens actually after you adopt too many kids. There's some studies on that. And I think I was maybe in like first grade when I had enough of this sort of social feedback, and I didn't know anyone else who was adopted, and all my friends kind of, they kind of look like their parents and they look like their brother and sister, and just enough of it finally clicked where I was like, whoa, this is really uncomfortable. And I may never get any sort of closure or insight or understanding of this. And from that early of an age, I was already connected to this notion of like, wow, life provides unsolvable mysteries. And and I hate that, right? I was just so upset about it. It was so confronting. Like, wow, something really unstable got kind of created in me in those early years through that experience. And just a very short time later, my mother passed away from chemotherapy, the one who adopted me. And I was adopted at birth. So she was, my mom, rightfully so, all the way. And that was just the next layer and just another perfect little like, oh, so I don't get a mom either. Okay. So I got to surrender to that. And I wasn't raised with any sort of religion or anything. So I didn't have anything, there was the general notion of, oh, she's an angel now or something, right? But nothing grounded. And my dad didn't even believe that either. So I didn't have anything to kind of grab onto. So that was another huge point of surrender. And realizing like, wow, this is the rest of my life. This is a permanent experience. This is absolutely permanent. And those are some of the biggest things we have to surrender to, it's everyone can like, where this too shall pass doesn't apply, which is a really powerful tool for surrendering to something that will pass. Right. So that was a little bit of a different one for me. And I could keep going. You want me to keep going? There's a few other that I kind of stack around that moment.
I do want you to keep going, but I just want to ask a few questions around that, because the way that you're speaking about it and the kind of inquiry that you were in about it sounds, pretty advanced. Were you thinking that way when these experiences happened? Were you questioning in that way? Wow.
Well, yeah. That's
quite something.
I definitely would have loved to know where my mom went. That was like the first thing. Like, I remember literally saying out loud, like, what do you mean I'm never going to see her again? Like, that doesn't make sense. So she went somewhere and now I don't see her. So where is she? And I didn't have an answer for that.
Yes. Yeah,
And
and what
I
you
think
went
even,
through,
oh, go ahead.
go on.
As you say, even it must have been in maybe kindergarten or first grade, like the adoption thing. My sister's full blood Korean. My brother's got blonde hair and blue eyes. Right. My
Wow.
mom was like a short, curly haired Jewish lady. My dad's like a Viking with a red beard, and like just this whole awesome, mixing pot of a family. So I always had a few extra things to think about than all my other friends,
Mhm.
and I always noticed that when I was a kid. Right. Like sometimes I'd think about, oh,
Yeah.
my sister has parents too that she's never going to meet. Like, who are they? Why did they do that? And there's just like my radar was just a little further out in considering. And also I remember that at that age, every time I ever met a kid or saw a kid, I was like, oh, I wonder if they have real parents or not. I wonder if they're adopted or not.
Yeah.
So it was just these extra little, and then also I wonder if they have some other thing, like after my mom passed too. Oh, I wonder if they have a parent who passed, or if they've experienced one of these kind of like bonus life experiences, as you could put it, not necessarily
Yes.
bonuses we like, but these kind of, everyone's walking around with some version of their unique little formula of, right, the things that have
Yeah.
happened to them and around them. So it had me thinking about that when I was like 7 or 8 years old. And now
Yes.
I
I mean,
got a weird brain as a
being
result.
exposed to those kinds of experiences, well, being exposed to those kinds of experiences so young is, already you are being invited. I'm sure it was extremely uncomfortable and very painful to go through a process of destabilization, meaning it immediately challenges the cultural and societal agreements, mutual agreements that is just kind of planted on us, or that we inherit. When I look at my son is turning 3 next week. He likes to watch Peppa Pig. And already he comes and he sits at the dinner table and he'll be like, right, okay, family of 4. There's a dad, there's a mom, there's a sister, and there's a brother. And he'll be like, my daughter's Peppa and he's George and I'm the mom. And I can see his mind is already thinking, this is what family is.
Mm-hmm.
This is what it looks like. This is the picture. This is the agreement.
Yeah.
And that happens unconsciously, all millions and billions of ways, as our brain is developing and we're growing up. And for you were faced with these huge life lessons very young, and already put through a phase of destabilization that your identity didn't, or the question of your identity and who are you and where do you fit, didn't look like anything else that or many thing else that you could see. And even the fact that you were faced with losing your mother so young, that again it challenges this whole just agreement that is absorbed, that this is the way life is, this is the way it should be. So I'm sure that brought on a whole set of real challenges for you, as well as an inquiry process. How did you react to that, experientially and in yourself?
It didn't, I don't think it really registered emotional. Like I don't think I really felt it until I was almost 18.
Mm.
I don't think there's just something about the way it landed then that was just so different. And it actually was a result of this class that I was in. It was like a white tantra thing that I did with a partner of mine. And they had us sitting across from each other. And then they had you embody the person you are angry at, like someone you have hatred for or mad at, and to say, and then the other person is you, and then you say to yourself what you wish that would have said. And just right out of my mouth, I said, I'm sorry I died. And that's when I realized what the feeling I was holding was, I was mad at my mom. Like, how dare you? Right? Like, I could have had a mom this whole time. What the heck? And I love moms. It's so special. It's like literally the most, of course, I got plenty of mama trauma jokes to back it up, but it's like it gave me this deep appreciation for that role, and how literally it's what makes the world go round. And that was a lot for me to process then. Thankfully, my partner at the time was much more mature than me, which was awesome. And she was able to hold space for that really well, which I'm very grateful for. But when I was just a kid, there was something as well about the lack of maturity from my dad that was easy to model. You know, I've seen my dad cry one tear in his whole life. And that was actually when my brother died. So that's a whole other piece to the pie. But when I was a kid, there was no real reference point. I didn't really, I actually specifically remember synchronistically, I wasn't home the night that my mom passed. For the last about year of her life, she stayed at home with like the IV drip and everything. Like they basically made a little hospital room at the house. And we had some family friends in town, and I loved swimming in pools when I was a little kid, and they were staying at a hotel. So I was like, oh, I want to stay at the hotel so I can swim in the pool all day. And the night I stayed there was the night she passed away. So I actually synchronistically was very blessed to not be there that night, because my dad told me she just fell asleep and didn't wake up. And then once I was old enough, I learned her morphine ran out, and she was addicted to morphine for the last few months of her life. And I'm very glad that I wasn't there, to put simply.
Yeah.
But when I came home the next day, they were basically wheeling out her bed in it, but just kind of there was like an ambulance there, and they were taking all this supplies back. And my first thought was like, oh, his mom's going back to the hospital. And then I found out what actually happened. And everyone was just kind of sitting in the backyard. My brother and sister were crying. They were probably like 12 and 15 or something like that, a little bit older than me. So they could kind of understand it a little more deeply. And I just remember I didn't cry when I first heard it. I couldn't get it. I just didn't get it. And thankfully, what I think allowed me to be somewhat of a functional kid moving forward into my life, even though I had my fair share of, I was a totally great kid, totally fine, but still just this black sheep thing. And actually after my mom died, I took on this sort of like, not only am I adopted and got kind of skimped on that, right? Because it's like, what the heck? I didn't get to decide. And then I don't have a mom either. I had this story that was like, I was dealt a bad hand. Therefore, I can do whatever I want because I deserve that. That's fair.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I still kind of I still kind of agree. I think that, for as far as a survival mechanism goes for an 8-year-old, it's like, great, homework. Pfft, I don't have to do homework. My mom died. Like you don't understand. Have your mom die and then try to do some homework. Right.
Yeah.
And that was interesting for me, and also gave me this really early life taste of a sense of independence and autonomy, and this kind of looking out for myself. And which, from the shadow side of that is, later in life I had to realize how much effort I had to put back into not being a lone wolf, or, being able to really let people in that sense. But I'm also grateful that it gave me this. I think I learned the art of a type of meditation or contemplation at such a young age as well, because I'd spent so much time with myself, feeling like people couldn't really understand me. I also walked everywhere. Yeah. I had so much time to walk to school, walk home to school, walk to my friends. And then eventually it's a scooter or a bike, but just so much time to be with my own thinking. And a lot of that time was spent just in that same sort of, it's like I became a philosophy initiate at a young age, right? Like, what is death? How does all that work? Right? Like, did my mom deserve that? Is that how that works? Do I deserve this? Is there some plan? Does it all make sense somewhere? And just to add to the chaos and the healing, the night that my mom, I can't remember if it was the night. It feels like it was that night, but it was that night or within a matter of days. We had this really full-on thunderstorm. So it was raining and lightning, and we're just kind of hanging out in the backyard, kind of watching the lightning strike, right? And then you count until you hear the thunder to see how far away it is and all that. Mm-hmm. And this lightning strikes the closest I've ever been to lightning strike. And if you've ever been really close to lightning strike, it is mind blowing, right? It's like everything electrifies and it's pure white for like a millisecond, and you like feel the electricity. And as soon as that lightning struck, I felt my mom kiss me on my cheek. And I knew it was my mom. Like I just knew it. And I remember I was like standing next to my dad. I was like, holy crap, Dad, Mom just kissed me on my cheek. And he gave me kind of like a bah humbug sort of thing. He didn't really, wasn't willing to play there, but I just felt that and I knew it. And that night I had my first lucid dream.
Yeah.
And that changed everything for me.
Yeah.
So from the age of 8 to now, and I'm 31 now, I have more memories of lucid dreams than I do of waking life. And I've lived I'm basically 62 at this point, because I get 24 hours worth of awareness sometimes when, normally it's just 12 or whatever.
Yeah.
But that was this huge initiation for me because, again, it just added to that philosophy. Like, what the heck what is that? What's happening when I go to sleep? What is that? I'm in all these other places. I'm in made up planets. I'm meeting people that don't exist. I'm meeting people that do exist. I'm meeting clones of myself. I'm meeting, right? Like just everything. And I started getting really good at it. I could wake myself up. I could fly. I loved jumping off of tall things just to wake myself up before I hit the ground or start to manifest stuff or, materialize things. And at the exact same time, that also initiated me into my subconscious and my unconscious, which is a whole other talk about surrender, because in dreams, there's no rules, right? That little thing you're feeling could turn into literally the whole world being on fire and the planet's crumbling apart and you're floating off in outer space and you have to surrender and you can't breathe and you have to surrender to that. I have died in millions of ways at this point. So literally even just the other night, I had a dream where I drowned, which was very interesting. And the moment someone had the chance to pull me out. So as soon as I fell under, I instantly just surrendered to, great, they're either pulling me out or I'm dead. All good. They're just going to pull me out or I'm dead. And I was so calm. I was super calm. And it was actually, I woke up super refreshed. I was like, that's so weird. I was literally just drowning like 5 seconds ago. I just woke up and I feel very relaxed. But that's been, talk about surrender, man. I've been eaten alive by sharks and felt the whole thing. I've been shot in every part of my body. I've been tasered in every part of my body. So I didn't even, it's funny. Like I almost forgot that all that is true. And now that I'm saying, like, talk about surrender, like, holy crap, like my whole half of my life has been mostly that.
Yes.
So thank you for bringing that back to me.
Oh my God, I have so many questions that I want to ask you. I have to try and catch them because this is so good. Okay. So, what I hear, firstly, everyone I've ever spoken to that meets death younger, early, most people can live most of their life without ever really meeting death. And therefore not having a relationship with death, which of course completely dictates your relationship with life. If you don't have a relationship with death, it impacts your relationship with life. And everyone I've ever spoken to that has met death young, I have clients who've met very young as babies. I actually met it in the womb. And you're speaking of meeting it very young too with your mother. And is that there's this experience where very young you start to experience the multidimensional levels of reality, and you start to, there's this kind of ability to be able to stand in both worlds. I've seen it so many times now that without consciously knowing it at the time, but when you're faced with the experience of that crossing over, that it opens up all these other dimensions. And so that makes so much sense of then this whole experience with other levels of consciousness and being able to journey and travel in your dreams. And, that just became part of your world. Now, most people will have those experiences and they'll think they're mad, or they'll think there's something wrong with them, or that will set up a whole series of strategic patterns and behaviors to try and hide it or block it or drink on it or take drugs on it or many things.
I tried that too.
Yeah. To suppress it, because it challenges so much of what we're educated about what is life, that we don't know how to be with it. We just don't know how to be with it. What I see, though, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that has actually also become part of your gift in the world, and your expression in the world. Then the other two things that I hear, which I think is really interesting, is that when you're faced with the experiences that you've had very young, just for the nature of how the mind works and how story works, then you're left with this identity or this kind of cloak that you're different, or you don't fit, or you're the odd one out. Has that been something that you have had to work with throughout your life? This kind of identity of being different?
Yes, and not in I was always friends with everybody. I was cool with all the different cliques in high school. Like all the different groups were cool with me. I think it actually, in a sense, because I remember even when I was, again, very young, with the adoption piece going, well, if the people I live with aren't technically my family, sure, some piece of paper says they are, but that means every other human being I will ever see is just as much my family as they are.
Yeah.
And so it actually gave me this deeper connection from one perspective, where sure, I acknowledge, but it never necessarily turned into like, oh, I'm so different, people don't understand me and I can't connect with them. It actually was this, I'm so curious about people. I wonder if anyone else has had a bunch of crazy shit happen to them like it has to me. And it made me more curious about people, more interested in them, which I'm very, very grateful for, because that could have gone really sour the other direction. I think I made it more of a, like, that being dealt that bad hand ultimately was like a me feeling unsure about myself, right? Like, well, if I'm the kid who clearly this is the hand I'm dealt, like this is the karmic thing I've been offered, what's going on with me? Like, why do I have to have all this terrible stuff happen to me? Maybe there's something wrong with me. And that kind of stayed just inside here. Thankfully, I didn't turn that into me having a bunch of kerfuffles with everyone around me, but definitely one inside of me for quite some time until I, was able to integrate that.
So then there's two other questions I want to ask you. When you lose someone your mother is the most pivotal relationship that you have in your world. It's your original relationship with intimacy. All our relationships with intimacy mirror our original relationship with intimacy, which is the one with mother. And so when you lose mother, that, that's going to challenge so much about your ability, your relationship to trust, and also control. So how has your relationship been with control in your life since then?
I love it. I'll start with that. I love certainty. I love certainty. I love control. I've actually integrated a sort of, I had a partner a few years ago help me realize I had some kind of like OCD type of things. Like even just, if the stuff isn't arranged on the desk a certain way and I can't control that, I would just, something felt uncomfortable. So I just didn't even know until she was like, oh, did you know that every time we go out to dinner, you like put all the stuff on the table in a certain way and then you kind of relax. And like, oh, that's so fascinating.
Yeah.
If there's anything wrong with that, at scale, that could become unnecessary suffering and agitation or, discomfort. So I'm really grateful that I've been able to work on that. I found a connection at one point as well with my, um, I became a food and a health junkie when I was probably 16 or 17, which was me just wanting to not get cancer like my mom, right? And trying to control, or in a sense, trying to heal her cancer by eating what I think she should have eaten. And
Absolutely.
that caught up with me a couple of years later. I'm very grateful for. And I'm still a health junkie, but there's no tension involved, which is nice.
Yes.
And yeah, control's interesting. It's definitely, and I've also had to move through, like most people who want to change the world, right? Releasing the fact that that's impossible in a sense. Like it's not, at least the way we frame it, to the way our ego thinks it's going to happen. Like, so releasing that control entirely. And especially, thank God I did that a few years ago, because man, the last year and a half would just be crazy if I thought I actually had to wake everybody up, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, big fan of control. I think I've found a healthy integration of that with the notion of self-mastery, because I see mastery as a practice and a devotional practice. And I define devotion as a commitment that's steeped in love. So if you got love in there's a lot of wiggle room. There's a lot of compassion. It's a much more winnable game than just trying to be perfect or trying to do things right. And instead keeping that sort of curiosity and that fascination with the human experience that I've always had, and applying that to myself, so I can still choose to kind of control my life. I run a program for men, and we just wrapped up a dopamine detox week, which is a week of complete control, right? Where you're not, no coffee, no cannabis, no alcohol, no masturbation, no pornography, no nothing, right? And that is something that, from a healthy way, I think humans need to get in touch with, especially because of the way the world, works right now, to just completely ignore that and turn us into these gluttonous, consumeristic, totally numbed out zombies, right? So I'd say for the sake of what we deserve and what's possible for us, there's a really healthy way to connect with, I guess you could use the word control, but there might be another, self-mastery might be a better word for that.
Yes.
But there's a really good chance even the self-mastery thing is ultimately budded from this deep little, like, oh my gosh, my life is crazy. Like, this person's dead, this abusive relationship, this going on here. Like, I totally need to control this. That would just make me be a lot happier.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm hearing, what I'm hearing and what I want the listeners to be able to hear, and what I'm kind of trying to shape here is how much your childhood experiences will then shape the creation and the building and the birthing of the character that becomes Nathaniel. And that's not individual, that's universal. That is just the nature of how human beings function and work, is that when we have these big or not even just big experiences of threat in our childhoods, then we go into, that's how the character starts building in a form of survival to it. That, of course, if you lose the most fundamental relationship to anybody is your mother, and then you face death in that way, and you just couldn't change it or control it, of course that's then going to shape the choices and the behaviors and the patterns and the things that you're led to that become who you think Nathaniel was or is. And that's, I want everyone to hear this. This is how the character, this is how the me gets formed. And we think that's who we are. And of course you've gone further than that, but most will think that that's it. That's, I have to eat this way, and I have to drink this way, and I have to say these things, and I have to have things in a certain order. Well, underneath fundamentally is just this experience of absolute powerlessness, which is the ultimate powerlessness. And everything else is a form of resistance to being with that powerlessness. Now, and then when you speak about the self-mastery, I hear, what's interesting is when you speak about what you just did with the men, I don't hear that as control. I hear that as surrender.
Great. Yeah, totally.
the drinking and the consumption and the scrolling and the masturbation, all of that is actually a form of resistance to being with the human experience, to being,
Mm-hmm.
to being.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah,
all
well
ways to
said.
try and get us away from being.
Yeah. I think
And
for a lot of the guys who this stuff is new to, it feels like such a willpower type of thing, which is almost the opposite of surrender. You can kind of
yes,
will yourself to surrender in a sense, but even that's just kind of being heady about it. But I love how you put that, because it's true. It's to just be with what is the, you know, the doorway of surrender,
yes,
maybe.
yes,
And I also think that we completely are made of our childhood experiences, and sometimes it's important to realize there's a oppositional effect as well, where you might, you know, a lot of women in their 30s, right? They go, oh my God, I'm turning into my mother. Or you might realize, oh my gosh, I'm the anti-mother, right? Like I'm becoming everything right? So it can kind of go both ways. So sometimes people get confused. They're like, oh,
absolutely.
wait a minute. A great childhood. What do you, and it's like, well, maybe you know, are going against that in a certain way, but then also
Yeah,
realizing that there has to be, and from my perspective, but there's a asset to each of them, right? So it's
of
like
course.
my willingness to look at the control and
Yeah.
realize it as a skill set. Like my hypervigilance from my traumatic childhood has made me an incredible coach, because
Yes.
it's really, really easy for me to just like, oh, wait, how are they? Oh, what are they feeling right now? Look at the body language. Their room looks kind of messy on the call. Like, I wonder what that's about. And just so easy to observe and notice. Or it could have turned me into this absolutely, you know, psychotic, anxious, you know, I could have just run my life into the ground with that.
Yes.
So also for everyone listening to know that there, the sort of the mechanism of what's playing out is an asset. And then the theme,
Yes.
or like the story that the mechanism is kind of steeped in, is what will kind of lead to that either quote unquote positive or negative sort of attribute in your life, or be, you know, kind of pattern in your life.
Yes, and absolutely. And what you're speaking about, what you just spoke about, is the distinction between being unconscious over how your past is living you and creating you and choosing your choices, and having consciousness over it. And this is the important thing. As long as we are human, we will have a story. If we're trying to escape having a story, well, then we're resisting the fact that we're human. That real freedom is to be human and to be able to be with the story, but not have it live us.
Yeah.
And what you're speaking of is that when we gain consciousness over the story and the character and the ways of being and the ways of the all the things that have led us and driven us through our lives, and when we can get consciousness over it, then we get to have the power, the self-mastery over working with it rather than it living us unconsciously. And that is the distinction between being in survival and being in life, living, is that we actually
Well
get,
said.
and this is what I want everybody, if I could tell everyone the secret, if you knew how powerful you were, you're already generating your entire reality, but it's unconscious. Now, what happens when we get consciousness?
Yeah.
That we actually have the ability to be able to use the very things that have been creating destruction in our lives, and use it with power and choice and presence.
Yeah.
That the very things that have caused pain in your life are now what cause healing, connection,
Yeah.
power,
Just after
leadership.
a couple of years of the most uncomfortable work of your life, but hey, it gets you there. It works.
But that's maturation.
Yeah.
That's it. It's that. And again, this is what I find so beautiful, is that everything that we have lived through gets to be an opportunity for us to be able to use it purposefully.
That's my so my body of work is called integrative leadership, and I define integration as utilization of wholeness.
Yeah.
So you literally just said, you know, it's like we have to use it. We give it a purpose, right? That's one of the it already has a purpose, right? But we just like to live in the story that it's like, no, that's just this bad thing that wasn't supposed to happen, or whatever it might be. And that's just a completely unwinnable game, right? And a lot of people can enjoy. I remember really enjoying the idea of oneness before I had an experience of it. And those are night and day, completely different things, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people are getting excited about shadow work, right? And ancestral healing and trauma healing and all these different things. And it's so important to be willing to pay attention to that distinction between, like, am I actually engaged into something and utilizing this? It's one thing to accept an experience. It's another thing to be stoked about it. Like, whoa, that was some gnarly stuff that happened to me. I'm so excited to find out how that has made me into something that I can't even comprehend yet. Right.
Yes,
and it's a complete, and again, easier said than done. And some people might spend the next 30, 40, 50, 60 years still coming to terms with this stuff. There's no time frame. There's no rules to how that's supposed to work. And I'm also not some perfectly healed being either. And I do think that there is a lot more integration available to us. And it's quite a simple thing mechanically, just not easy because it's so uncomfortable, which has gotten me really curious about, great. So like, how do I get better at being uncomfortable? If that's the whole point, if that's it, like if all healing is on the other side of me getting uncomfortable somewhere, can I just get better at getting uncomfortable? And that's been a huge, and which requires surrender.
Yes.
Right? Like there's, you don't, I don't know if you're a part of the cold plunge crew, everyone's doing their ice baths and all that kind of stuff, but there's an interesting secret to that as well. Cause you get in there and your body wants to tense up, because when you get out and you're cold and you shivering generates warmth, right? Your body's doing that on purpose. But to be able to like really stay in there long enough and not like pull a muscle and hurt yourself, you have to do the exact opposite. And it's just this pure relaxing and almost finding like a blissful, like that deep open exhale in that space. And, those types of practices have been huge for me. But even better than that, one of the themes of surrender in my life that has come up over and over and over again has been the fact that I've had to just there's been so many times in my life where I've had to just tell someone the truth. And that gave me everything I needed. Right. And that aligned everything in my life. And that was 1,000,000 times more uncomfortable than an ice bath, or, even more uncomfortable than like a crazy psychedelic trip or something, because people will do that to heal, which is great. That's another path. That's awesome. I haven't done a lot of that. I think the lucid dreaming kind of has given me enough of like a DMT sort of, taste in the back of my mouth. Yeah, exactly. It's tiring, honestly. Sometimes I wake up and I'm like, I didn't sleep last night. I was, saving a bunch of lives on some distant planet. But there's something, there's a built-in healing process. I also love the term that all healing is social healing. There's no such thing as personal healing.
Yep.
Because anybody can be totally healed, like in their bedroom on their yoga mat, with their.
But if you're not
stuff,
bringing it into the marketplace, then what kind of impact does it have, or how real is it? I want to go back to telling the truth. I smiled because I literally wrote an entire chapter called Truth Telling.
Of course.
Every single part of us that avoids or wants to resist telling the absolute truth about who we are and what we feel and what we need and what we're experiencing is us trying to control how the world responds to us or how others respond to us, which comes from a space of lack, which comes from a place of fear.
And you're creating a world. You're like creating another world that doesn't exist.
A whole world. Exactly. Yeah. You're creating a whole world based on micromanagement of how you want the world to perceive you based on what you think or what you have believed is acceptable,
Yeah.
which of course is an illusionary world,
Yeah.
becomes life, what many will call life. That's our life. Including myself. I write about it in the book. My husband and I, after 9 years of marriage, we separated because we had the same fight over and over again for 9 years. Doesn't matter, different details, the same dynamic just kept kicking off. And we separated for 6 months, really on the verge of divorce, just about to divorce. And we had this massive breakthrough moment where we sat together and we finally just told each other the truth, that we no longer were trying to hold on to this picture that is called marriage. It had already gone. We'd already let it go. We no longer had to hold on to this picture of trying to be somebody for the other, because that had already gone with the marriage and the expectations with it. And somehow that freed us up to simply just tell the truth. And I was able to say all the things that I never thought I was allowed to say about being a woman and being a mother and being a wife and being anything in the world that, conventional marriage isn't for me. I don't want to be a full-time mother. All the things that, a million billion things that were inside of me that I felt I couldn't say. And he did the same. And it was absolutely the breakthrough moment for us, that finally all the shackles of control of having to be somebody for the other in order to get love or to fit marriage or to make this story of marriage work just was released. And it opened up a pathway for a whole nother level of freedom and love that I didn't even know was available. And I speak about it so often, like how much do we suppress the truth, even from ourselves?
Yeah.
Yeah,
we lie to ourselves constantly and create these little worlds and these little pockets of, like just to, but also again, just because we don't feel so much of my life around this changed when I realized, and again, so part of the synchronicity of losing my mother, both of my mothers, is all the incredible women who have just been placed into my life, just been this perfectly, of course I avoided all of them for a lot of the time because I genuinely, I was such a prude in high school because I thought, I didn't think that, but there was this like, oh, if a woman gets close to me, she's going to die or give me away, because those are the two, prime examples that I had.
Of course.
But I had this partner who helped me realize the only thing I'm actually afraid of is how uncomfortable I feel in my body.
Yeah.
And that's it. And sure, and there's nuance to that and different things to genuinely be afraid of. That's probably a healthy fears to have. And for the personal development, crew and this incredible community that we're a part of, and ultimately every human being who's just trying to like get by and be happy and be healthy and do all this stuff. It's this interesting, like, I'm going to lie to this person right now not because of what they're going to do if I tell the truth, but because of how I will not be able to hold myself in response to that. Right. Because everyone who's listening has had plenty of times where the truth comes out, and for whatever reason you can hold, like you've had those moments where there's enough, something's robust enough and you're just able to do that. I always love reminding people too, it's like the best time to get bad news is after a great night's sleep, some good morning sex, a good workout, some good food, you take a nice shower, and boom, like bring it to me. Right. Which is where a lot of my work, it's like, well, why aren't we always living in a way to be available to, right. And not so that we are denying the negativity or the intensity but so we can actually be there, right? It's like, if I'm going to get upset about something, I want like the fullest version of me to meet that upset so I can actually be upset instead of kind of be this safe version of upset, or a safe, that's really, I'm sad. Great. Well, I'll cry for like a minute because and then I got to get back to work, right? It's not safe for me to like spend the rest of the day grieving this or mourning this. But even that is
Yep.
also a bunch of BS.
Yep. Yep. Oh, I really enjoy speaking with you. This has
Yeah, this
been
is
a really
great.
wonderful conversation. And I feel like we could just go on and for us, there's so much that we could dive into, but I really, really want to thank you for saying yes. I'm a relative stranger in your world that just DM'd you out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for saying yes and for bringing yourself here and sharing yourself. It's been really fulfilling for me to sit with you and to listen and to be in dialogue. And I know that for the listeners, it would really gifted a lot of wisdom. So thank you so much
Awesome.
for your time.
Thanks
I
for
want to
having me.
ask you
Thanks for holding such a great container too. You're just a great listener, great questions. I think we had a little delay with the internet lag, so I might have talked over you a couple times, but this has
no.
been wonderful.
Oh, I actually I think that's going to be fine. It'll work itself out. But I have one more question for you.
Great.
And it's, with where we are in the world right now, and there is a lot going on. And like you said at the beginning, I too have a sense we really are just at the beginning. And the way that I see it, when I zoom right out and I look at, my work is specializing in ontology. So I work with the nature of human being, and I really look at us as a species and what is occurring as a species. And I really see us at the beginning of a process of maturation. And it's extremely uncomfortable and painful process. And there are some who are in resistance and fighting, and then there are some who are surrendering, and we're in that kind of beginning of the dance. And really, we don't know where it's going to go. We don't know where this one is going to go. But when I ask you about where we are in the world right now, and you had one thing to say to people who are listening, what would that be?
You can trust it.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe me, then there's a really good chance you don't trust yourself. Because that's what dictates that. So continuing to really show up for yourself, really play into that sort of like holographic model of reality, and be willing to check in. Where am I mandating myself? Where am I locking myself down? Where am I going to war with myself? Where am I, sick? Where am I unhealthy? Where am I, allowing these types of things to go on? And that can be very uncomfortable, really tricky. I think humanity's probably about 25 years old right now. Like we just hit that, like, oh my gosh, I'm just like my mom, like we were saying, right? Or I'm not, right? And it's that first real tangible sense of coming to terms with how this is what the setup actually is. So in the same way that we can trust that all of these things from our childhood, all of this pain, all of these problems, all these traumas are assets and are gifts and have a built-in purpose, what we're experiencing right now works exactly the same way. And it's our job to go prove that to ourselves, go make sure of it.
Yes. And like you said at the very beginning, when a tree needs to fall, it's not worried about what it lands on, and to trust that. And as is any process of aliveness, things need to fall, things need to crumble, things need to break, things need to dissolve, things need to die. And we can trust that inherently, that deeper process. If we don't make it and the species become extinct, I have no question of doubt that creation and life will continue to regenerate.
Oh yeah,
we'd be some ways.
What a great compost pile,
Yeah. But that absolute universal intelligence is so immensely powerful.
Yeah.
That's really what gives me peace every day.
Good.
Stepping into that.
And just to add to that, I'm 100% certain that we will make it. So just to add that into the pile as well. Like I have zero concern, because that's how trust works. Right. And there's also something about specifically what we're going through right now and what it's bringing up in us and everyone's connection to, like, what do I actually care about? What's actually important to me? And that force is what will take care of everything.
Yes. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Nathaniel.
Thank you.
What a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. This was so great.